Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been teaching for 13 years now. In that time, I've seen all kinds of parents. Most are great, they love their kids and treat us teachers with respect. But every now and then, you get one that makes you question everything about your career choice. I became a mentor teacher 6 years into my career, responsible for guiding 20 kids through their first 2 years of secondary school. It's intense work. You really get to know every single one of those students inside and out. When things go well, it's incredibly rewarding. When they don't, well, let me tell you about the 2 years that nearly broke me. A new student joined my mentoring group at the start of his first year. He seemed like a decent kid at first. Quiet, maybe a little awkward like most teenagers are when they're trying to figure out where they fit in. There were some minor hiccups, nothing unusual for someone adjusting to secondary school. Then Christmas break happened. I still don't know what changed during those 2 weeks, but when he came back in January, it was like someone had flipped a switch inside him. The transformation was immediate and shocking. He started bullying other students, shoving kids in the hallways, completely disrupting every single class. He'd curse at teachers right to their faces and grab things that didn't belong to him. We suspected he was stealing from both students and staff, but without security cameras, we couldn't prove anything. We called his parents in multiple times. The school counselor sat in on these meetings, along with my supervisor. Every single time, his mother would sit there and deny everything. She insisted her son would never do those things and claimed we must be mistaken. When I explained that multiple teachers were reporting the same behaviors and gave specific examples like him cursing at the math teacher and throwing books, she would act confused and ask if we were sure we had the right student. It was maddening. We had no grounds to expel him since his mother refused to acknowledge any of the problems and we couldn't get him the help he clearly needed. Summer break came and the administration finally installed security cameras throughout the school since so many things had gone missing during the year. The second year started and on the very first day, he made sure I knew he was back and worse than ever. We had 5 separate incidents requiring phone calls to his mother in just that first week. When we called her in for another meeting, she had the audacity to act surprised. She claimed to be shocked that I was the only teacher complaining about her son. I reminded her that I wasn't the only one, and that I'd told her repeatedly that multiple teachers had reported problems. I explained that I was just the one coordinating the communication with her. Then she made a demand that would come back to haunt her. She told me that if other teachers had issues, they should contact her directly. She wanted emails or phone calls from each teacher who claimed her son was misbehaving. But she doubted that would happen since she knew her son would never do the things we were saying. I was absolutely furious, but I managed to keep my voice level and told her I would discuss this with my colleagues. That night I brought her demand to the next staff meeting. At first there were some confused looks and frowns around the room. Then I saw it. Eyes starting to gleam with mischief, evil grins spreading across faces, followed by the kind of laughter that meant trouble for someone. By this point, her son had set a school record with 20 behavioral entries per day in our digital system. The malicious compliance began the very next morning. He walked onto school property and immediately started hurling insults at a classmate, including vile comments about the boy's mother having cancer. 2 teachers witnessed it, so 2 emails went straight to his mother. During his first 3 class periods, his behavior was so disruptive that 3 more emails were sent. At morning break, he picked up a trash bin and hurled it across the cafeteria. 3 teachers and the custodian saw it happen. 4 more emails. Then the custodian sent another email explaining that he'd refused to clean up the mess and had thrown a chair before storming out. The remaining 5 periods of the day involved 6 different teachers. Science class had 2 instructors, so 6 more emails plus 3 phone calls to dear old mom. Every single email was sent with read receipts, meaning she had to manually click on each notification. On average, she was getting 15 emails per day just from the teaching staff. and I still had the pleasure of calling or emailing daily with my recap. After 2 weeks of this bombardment, she finally cracked. She called me to complain that she'd been getting my emails and that it was getting to be too much. I reminded her that the last time we met, she had specifically demanded that every teacher and staff member contact her directly about her son's behavior. I explained that we were simply following her exact instructions to keep her up to date and ensure she heard from my colleagues personally. She tried to tell me we could stop now, but I explained that, unfortunately, we couldn't do that. Since her son continued these behaviors daily, it was our professional duty to keep parents up to date about what their children did at school. Besides, she had requested this arrangement, and we certainly didn't want her getting upset about not knowing what was happening with her son. When she complained that things were getting completely out of hand, I disagreed and told her that my colleagues had actually mentioned how much they appreciated having such an involved parent who wanted to hear from them directly. I thanked her for that and ended the call before she could respond. This continued for another 8 weeks. She called or emailed several times each week, always getting the same response from me and every other staff member. We were simply following her explicit instructions. Meanwhile, we'd been trying everything to get her son help. I consulted with the school counselor, outside therapists, and even contacted Child Protective Services. His sudden behavioral change was a massive red flag. I'd only had my teaching degree for 3 years, but I knew this wasn't normal. Child Protective Services investigated and concluded there was no reason for further action. Somehow the parents agreed to let them visit but refused to accept any other help, even when the agency suggested getting him evaluated and into counseling. Every time we brought up getting him support, his mother would repeat that her son wouldn't do those things and that he wasn't like that. I tried talking to him directly, treating him fairly, while referring him to counselors who could help, but he told them all to go away, using much more colorful language. Then came the incident that ended everything. Apparently, shouting, cursing, and wishing horrible diseases on teachers wasn't enough anymore. When I tried to have yet another conversation with him about his behavior, he picked up a chair and swung it at me, right in front of the entire class, a colleague, and those newly installed security cameras. His classmates immediately tackled him to the ground, while my colleague called a police station across the street. The officers arrived within minutes, got the students off him, and I managed to escape with severe bruising but no broken bones. The school pressed charges on my behalf. The real satisfaction came during the meeting with both parents. Even with overwhelming evidence, his mother still tried to deny everything. She insisted her son would never do something like that and claimed there must be some mistake. Then the principal pulled up the security footage. Watching her face when she saw her precious son swing that chair at me was absolutely priceless. I genuinely wished I could have recorded her expression to watch again later with some snacks. Her son was immediately expelled, received substantial community service hours, paid a hefty fine, and got a juvenile criminal record. Learning that his father had been completely in the dark about everything was even better. The emails had been going to a shared family account, but since smartphones weren't common then, he never saw them because she'd been hiding everything from him. When he discovered the extent of her lies and denial, he filed for divorce. The father felt so terrible about what had happened that he sent care packages to every single staff member at the school. We never had to deal with the mother or her son again. The story has a happy ending though. The younger brother enrolled with us the following year, and we continued our email updates with the father, this time to tell him what a wonderful, well-behaved student his other son was. I had finally gotten a weekend off, which almost never happens in my line of work. I decided to use my rare free time to do something most people take for granted: grocery shopping during normal hours. Usually I'm stuck doing my shopping at 24-hour stores at 2 in the morning, which limits my options and means I'm always running on fumes. But that Saturday, I was actually awake and alert during daylight hours, ready to tackle my weekly shopping like a normal human being. The local supermarket was busier than I expected, but I didn't mind. It felt good to be out among people during regular hours for once. I took my time, actually reading labels instead of just grabbing whatever was closest. I even picked up some fresh flowers for my apartment, something I never would have thought to do during my usual zombie mode shopping trips. After about an hour of leisurely shopping, I headed to the parking lot with my cart full of groceries. The lot was packed, which made sense given it was prime shopping time on a weekend. I had managed to snag a decent spot earlier, not too far from the entrance, but not right up front either. When I approached my car, I could see several vehicles circling the lot like vultures, looking for open spaces. I felt a little guilty knowing I had a good spot that would soon be available, but I also knew I needed to take my time loading everything properly. After working long shifts where every minute counts, I had learned to appreciate the luxury of not having to rush. I popped my trunk and started organizing my bags. I always like to group similar items together and make sure nothing heavy is sitting on top of something that could get crushed. It's a habit from years of being exhausted and wanting to make putting groceries away easy when I get home. That's when I heard the car horn. I looked up to see a black car idling nearby. The driver rolled down her window and asked if I was leaving. I told her yes, but that I needed a minute to load up my groceries. I figured this was a normal interaction. People ask if you're leaving, you tell them yes, but that you need a moment, they wait or move on. Simple enough. But instead of a polite acknowledgement, I heard an exasperated sigh from her direction. She demanded that I hurry up because she needed the spot. The tone caught me off guard. It wasn't a request, it was a command. I looked over at her more carefully. She was probably in her late 30s, wearing expensive-looking jewelry that caught the light. Through her windshield, I could see two kids in the back seat, both looking restless. I told her I would just be another minute trying to keep my voice pleasant, but I was starting to feel annoyed. I had every right to take a reasonable amount of time to load my groceries. It's not like I was taking forever or being deliberately slow. I continued loading my bags, trying to ignore the car that was now blocking part of the driving lane. Other cars were having to navigate around her, and I could see a few drivers looking irritated. But she just sat there, engine running, clearly staking her claim to my spot. I was about halfway through loading when I heard a car door slam. I looked up to see the woman walking toward me, her face set in an expression of pure annoyance. She lectured me about how some people have kids and need to get home, and that I should be more considerate. I had been perfectly polite and had told her I just needed a minute. I was loading groceries at a normal pace, not dawdling, but not rushing either. I told her again that I understood, but that I was almost done. I gestured to my cart, which was clearly more than half empty. Any reasonable person could see I was making progress and would be finished soon. But apparently, she wasn't a reasonable person. She declared that she didn't have time for this and that she was taking the spot whether I liked it or not. Before I could even process what she meant by that, she reached into her purse and pulled out her keys. Without any warning, she stepped up to the side of my car and started dragging the keys along the paint. The sound was horrible, that distinctive scraping noise of metal on metal. I watched in complete shock when she deliberately carved a long scratch into my driver's side door. I shouted at her, asking what she was doing. My voice came out louder than I intended. This woman was actually vandalizing my car because I wouldn't move fast enough for her liking. Her kids were pressed against the windows of her car, watching the whole thing unfold. I felt bad for them. They were seeing their mother behave like an absolute maniac over a parking spot. She yelled back that I was taking too long and that she needed the spot. She moved to scratch another section of my car, this time near the rear door. The scratch was deep enough that I could see it would definitely need professional repair. I told her to stop immediately and announced that I was calling the police. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands. I had dealt with difficult people plenty of times in my nursing career, but this was beyond anything I had experienced. This woman was destroying my property because she felt entitled to a parking spot that wasn't even hers yet. She told me to go ahead and call them, claiming they wouldn't do anything. Then she demanded again that I move my car. She had the audacity to look smug about it, like she had somehow won. She crossed her arms and stood there like she was in the right, completely ignoring the fact that she had just committed a crime. I dialed the emergency number while keeping my eyes on her, afraid she might try to do more damage. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline in shock of what had just happened. The dispatcher was professional and told me officers would be there shortly. The woman heard me giving the location and describing what had happened, but she didn't seem concerned at all. While we waited, she got back in her car but kept it positioned to claim my spot. She actually turned up her music and started checking her phone like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I stood next to my scratched car, still trying to process the whole situation. Other shoppers had started to notice the commotion. A few people slowed down when they walked past, clearly sensing that something was wrong. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes, which felt like hours. Two officers got out and approached us. I immediately started explaining what had happened, pointing to the scratches on my car. But before I could finish, the woman got out of her car and put on a completely different persona. She told the officer that she was grateful he was there and spun a tale about how I had been refusing to give her the parking spot. She claimed she had two young children and groceries that needed to get home, and that I had been deliberately taking my time and being completely unreasonable. She actually started tearing up when she spoke, playing the part of a helpless mother being victimized by some inconsiderate man. If I hadn't witnessed her behavior myself, I might have been impressed by the performance. One of the officers asked me to tell them my version of events. I explained that I had been loading my groceries at a normal pace when she approached me and demanded I hurry up. I told them that when I said I needed another minute, she took her keys and scratched my car. I pointed to the obvious scratches along my car's side. They were clearly fresh and deep. The officer examined the scratches while his partner talked to the woman. That's when several bystanders approached. The first witness told the officers that they had seen what happened and that the woman had definitely scratched my car because I wouldn't move it fast enough for her. A second bystander agreed, saying she had been yelling at me and then just started keying my car, calling the whole thing crazy. The woman's face went completely white when she realized her victim act wasn't going to work. The officer asked her if it was true that she had damaged my vehicle, like the witnesses were saying. She stammered that it wasn't true and that the witnesses didn't understand the situation, but it was too late. The evidence was right there on my car, and now she had multiple witnesses contradicting her story. The officer told her that she was under arrest for vandalism and destruction of property. They read her rights while she protested her innocence, but the damage was done. Her expensive car got towed from the scene and her kids had to be picked up by someone else. The officer told me I could press charges if I wanted to. He said that given the witnesses and the clear evidence, it was likely she would be found guilty. I told him I definitely wanted to press charges. After all the paperwork and statements were done, I finally finished loading my groceries. The parking spot that had caused all this drama sat empty for several minutes before someone else took it. Driving home, I kept thinking about how someone could feel so entitled to something that wasn't theirs, that they would actually commit a crime to get it. The repair estimate for my car ended up being over $800, all because someone couldn't wait 5 more minutes for a parking spot. The whole experience made me realize how my job had actually prepared me for situations like this better than I thought. In the emergency room, you see people at their worst moments when stress and desperation can make them do things they normally wouldn't. But this woman wasn't in a life or death situation, she was just impatient about parking. A few weeks later, I found out she had been convicted and ordered to pay for all the damage to my car, plus additional fines. I needed a job badly when I moved to a new state at 20 years old. I didn't know anyone and had barely any money. The gas station on the corner was hiring, so I applied even though it wasn't glammy. The job wasn't bad. I worked the register, stocked shelves, and helped customers. My manager Angel was genuinely kind and always had our backs. The other employees were decent too, and we all got along well. But there was one person who made every shift terrible when Angel wasn't around. The assistant manager was a real piece of work. I'm calling him Richard because you can probably figure out why. This guy was in his 40s and acted like he owned the place when Angel stepped out. He'd dump his responsibilities on us regular employees and then scream at us when we couldn't finish everything fast enough while also doing our own jobs. Richard had this creepy way of talking to the female employees that made everyone uncomfortable. He'd make inappropriate comments and stand way too close when giving instructions. When we complained to Angel, she believed us and wanted to help, but her hands were tied. Richard had been there longer and apparently had some kind of protection from higher up the chain. The harassment got worse over the 2 months I worked there. Richard would corner me during slow periods and berate me for the smallest things. He called me lazy, stupid, and worthless. Being autistic, I already struggled with confrontation and loud noises. His constant yelling sent my anxiety through the roof. I should mention something important about myself. I'm naturally timid and get extremely stressed when someone threatens me. When I feel genuinely threatened, I get physically sick. My breathing becomes shallow, my hands shake, and I feel like I might pass out. It's not something I can control, but that day, I learned I could use it to my advantage. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. I had asked my co-worker Cross if I could borrow his Bluetooth speaker for a few days. My own speaker had broken, and I'd ordered a replacement with my last paycheck, but it wouldn't arrive until the weekend. Cross was cool about it and said I could take it home until mine came in. Angel gave me permission to use it during my shift as long as I could still help customers properly. I had my music playing quietly behind the counter, just loud enough to make the boring hours pass by easier. Everything was fine until shift change happened and Richard walked in. He immediately noticed the speaker and started asking whose it was. I explained that Cross had let me borrow it for a few days. Richard's whole attitude changed when he realized I had something he wanted. Richard demanded I give him the speaker so he could play his own music. I politely declined, explaining that Cross had let me borrow it and I didn't want to risk anything happening to it while someone else was using it. Richard kept pushing, calling me selfish and telling me to just let him connect his phone for a bit. I stood my ground and repeated that I couldn't let him use it because if something happened, Cross would blame me. That's when Richard's mask completely slipped. He looked around to make sure no customers were nearby, then leaned in close. The security cameras couldn't pick up audio unless someone was speaking loudly, and he knew exactly where their blind spots were. Richard whispered under his breath that he had a knife, making sure only I could hear him. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My whole body went cold, and that familiar panic started rising in my chest. But something else happened too, a clarity I'd never experienced before. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe I was just tired of being afraid, but I knew exactly what I had to do. I took a deep breath and shouted at the top of my lungs, asking why he was threatening me with a knife. Richard immediately backed away, his eyes wide with panic. He knew the cameras had picked up my voice and now he'd have to respond. Richard frantically tried to backtrack, saying it was just a joke and telling me to chill out. But I wasn't chilling out. 2 months of harassment, intimidation, and watching him terrorize my co-workers had built up to this moment. I was shaking with fear and anger, but I wasn't backing down. I told him that if he thought threatening me was a joke, then here was a better one. He could have fun working alone because I quit. I walked out without looking back. Once I got to my car, the full weight of what had happened hit me. I called my mom, who I was living with while getting back on my feet, and explained everything through tears. She immediately said she was driving to pick me up and that we were going back to talk to Angel right away because this wasn't over. When we returned to the store, Angel took one look at my face and knew something serious had happened. She called her supervisor, who called his supervisor, and within an hour I was sitting in the back office with Angel, the branch manager, and the district manager. I told them everything, not just about the knife threat, but about months of harassment and intimidation. I mentioned that I'd seen Richard's custom pocket knife in the office before, one with his name engraved on it, so I knew he wasn't bluffing about having a weapon. The district manager asked if I was willing to file a police report, and I said absolutely. I explained that I didn't feel safe with him around, and neither did my co-workers. They called Cross to verify my story about the speaker, and he backed me up completely. He also told them about the pattern of harassment we'd all been experiencing. The managers reviewed the security footage and clearly heard me shouting about the knife threat. The police arrived within 20 minutes. They interviewed me, checked the cameras, and searched Richard's belongings. Sure enough, they found the custom pocket knife in his jacket pocket. Since he didn't have a concealed carry permit and had used it to threaten a disabled employee, He was arrested on the spot. Angel apologized for what had happened and said they should have done more to protect me and the others. I told her, I just hoped this meant other people wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. A few months later, I learned the full extent of what happened to Richard. Not only was he fired immediately, but the investigation revealed he had a history of similar behavior at previous jobs. He was convicted on multiple charges: threatening physical harm to a disabled person, sexual harassment, sexual assault, and carrying an unauthorized concealed weapon. Cross got a promotion to assistant manager, and the whole work environment improved dramatically. Angel made sure everyone knew they could come to her with any concerns without fear of retaliation. Richard wanted my co-worker's speaker that day. Instead, he got speakers, the kind attached to a podium in a courtroom where a judge sentenced him to jail time. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.